Hi everyone, my name is Adam Schneider. I'm a sound designer and musician, and a few weeks ago I posted a video of a demonstration of a drum sequence patch I created on the Moog Sub 37, which sounds like this. So, a few people were interested in how this was made, so I'll be doing a tutorial on how you can create kick, snare, and hi-hat sounds and program them using the sequencer. It's a somewhat complicated patch, but hopefully it's not too bad when you see the logic behind it and how it was built. Rather than exactly recreating this patch with every single value, I'm going to show you how you create a patch like this so you can make your own drum patterns with kick, snare, and a hi-hat percussion-like sound. I'll also be using the Moog Sub 37 VST editor to demonstrate how to create this patch. You can do it on the hardware, but it is much easier to demonstrate and program this kind of a complicated patch using the VST editor. So let's start by initializing our sound. Good, let's go to the editor view. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a self-oscillating filter kick, and this is going to be the sound that we base all of our other sounds off of. So if you go to your mixer, we're going to turn off all these oscillators because we're not going to use them right now, and we're going to turn off the noise and feedback. Next, we're going to turn the resonance on the filter all the way up so it self-oscillates. And let's turn off keyboard tracking for now. So if we set it in 6-pole mode, we'll get the loudest tone, which is what we want for a nice, strong, punchy kick. So let's turn the cutoff frequency to about here. So next, let's turn up our filter envelope amount to shape the sound. Make sure you have the attack all the way down so you have a nice snappy kick. And let's start by turning up our decay. Make sure sustain is all the way down. Next, let's go to our amp envelope and begin to shape that one as well. Let's start by taking the sustain and making sure it's all the way down and making sure the attack is all the way down too. Now let's give it a longer decay. I'm also going to turn up the release, so if you release the key, the note doesn't cut off abruptly. Same thing with the filter envelope. Now I'm going to go down to this section, and for the amp envelope, I'm going to turn the velocity amount all the way down, so the amp envelope will not be affected by incoming keyboard velocity. It'll always play at full volume. And let's do the same thing for the filter envelope. And I want a little bit more meat and body at the front of my kick drum, so we're going to play with the amplitude envelopes whole time, so let's just try turning that up a little bit. If you turn it up a bunch, you can kind of hear what it's doing, but let's just give it a little bit for now. That's feeling pretty good. And I want to get a little bit more grit and volume out of my sound, so let's try turning up the multi-drive. You can get some nice saturated kick sounds. Let's try leaving it at about halfway for right now. The last thing I'm going to do is turn on the multi-trig and reset for both of the envelopes. We shouldn't need it because we'll be using the sequencer, but for a patch like this, just to be safe, I always turn them on to make sure we have the snappiest percussion sounds possible from the envelopes. So now we have a basic kick drum. So now let's start to make our sequence. We're going to start by creating a very basic 4-on-the-floor dance sequence. So let's go into the sequencer view. And let's make it just one measure long. So we're going to set it to 16 steps. So in 4/4 time, each of these steps represents a 16th note. So to start, we want a kick drum on each quarter note beat, which is steps 1, 5, 9, and 13. So let's start by putting a pitch of C1 on all of those steps. and finally 13. Now let's turn our sequencer on and set it to play back the sequence. Now if I hold down a single note, we should get. Let's turn the tempo down a little bit. And now we have a very basic 4-on-the-floor dance sequence going on. So the next thing we're going to want to do is to transform beats 2 and 4, which is steps 5 and 13. We want to turn these into snare drum hits. So then we'll have kick, snare, pretty basic beat. So in order to do this, we're going to have to modify our kick drum sound into a snare sound. And we're going to do that by using the velocity row here, controlling mod 1 and mod 2. So let's start by going over to step 5 and turning the velocity all the way up to 127. And let's do the same thing for step 13. So now using velocity, we'll be using mod 1 and mod 2 to shape the sound. So for the high velocities, what do we want exactly? Well, the kick drum's a lower sound, and for snare drum, we need a higher sound. So the first thing we want to do is open the filter up more. And we're going to do that by using mod 1 with velocity as a source. So let's turn this knob all the way to the right, the very last setting here, which is program source. And let's set it to velocity. I'm going to take this mod wheel parameter here and set it to 8192, which is the center. So now mod wheel is no longer controlling anything, which is what I want for this patch. So now that our program source is velocity, let's turn up our filter amount. So at higher velocities, the filter opens up more. So for now, let's just turn it up all the way. So it's working. When we have a high velocity, the pitch is going up, but I want it to sound like a snare. So to do that, we'll be using mod 2 set to a noise LFO. So let's go to mod 2 and turn this knob all the way to the right, which is program source. And now let's click on the program source dropdown and set it to noise LFO. So now we're going to take this noise LFO and modulate the filter with it only on the high velocities. So if we turn mod 2's velocity amount up here, so now mod 2, our noise LFO, is being shaped and scaled by velocity. And let's turn the filter amount all the way up. So at high velocities, the noise LFO will now be modulating the filter. And we can start tweaking it. Let's leave it open all the way for now. So now we have a basic alternating kick snare pattern. So the next thing I want to do is create some percussive hi-hat-like tones in between the kick and snare. There's a number of different ways we can do it, but let's try using oscillator 1 for this. So the first thing that we want to do is go over to our mixer section and turn on oscillator 1. And let's set the volume to about here. And let's set it to a square wave. And we'll put the octave at 4 feet. Next, let's go back to the sequencer tab. And let's put in some notes for the hi-hat. Let's try C5, C6, C5, and let's try a repeating pattern like that just for now. You can type in any high-pitch values you want. I'm just doing this right now for consistency. So for variety, let's just make this one G7. Let's make this one D7. Let's make this one G sharp 7. And let's make this one D6. Great. So now between our kick and snare, we should have some high pitches going on. So you can kind of hear it, but the self-oscillating filter is masking or filtering out the high frequency notes. It kind of sounds like a bunch of kick drums with some pitches behind it. So what I want to do is actually turn down the resonance on the filter during these hi-hat hits. And to do that, we'll be using this modulation row here to bring down the resonance. So in order to do that, let's go to sequencer mod destination here and set it to filter resonance. And now let's turn the mod amount all the way up so it's fully modulating. And we want to bring the resonance down, so let's use negative values here in our sequencer mod during the hi-hat hits. So this will bring the resonance fully down, and we shouldn't have any self-oscillation at that point. So let's hear what that sounds like. Good, so we're not hearing any of that self-oscillating zap anymore. But it still just sounds like a high square wave tone because that's what it is right now. So let's change that by using our noise LFO to modulate the pitch of oscillator 1. So let's go back to our editor tab, and Mod 2 is using a noise LFO as the source, and we're already modulating the filter at high velocities, so now let's try modulating the pitch at high velocities with the noise LFO. So let's just turn this all the way up. So now the noise LFO is modulating oscillator 1 scaled by velocity. So let's just try turning up the velocity on some of these hi-hat hits. Just some random values, and let's see what it sounds like. And you can hear we're getting some interesting noisy tones. And different velocity amounts change the level of noise modulating the filter and oscillator. So let's just do some more random velocities over here. Sorry, beat 9 is our kick drum, and we don't want any noise on that. So now we should have a much more interesting sequence with this tunable noise oscillator. So between the different pitches and velocities, we're getting these interactions and different timbres of noise. We can even introduce a little bit more of the resonance back into the filter on the hi-hat hits on certain steps for some more variation. Just a few little random tweaks I'm going to do. And you can kind of hear what that does. It gives it a little bit of a squelchy kind of sound. For now, I'm just going to turn some of these back down so they don't have as much resonance in them. So now why don't we try to introduce some ratcheting into our sequence. So what ratcheting will do is it will repeat and re-trigger a step for an amount that you defined over here with the ratchet count. So if you have it set to 2, this beat will actually have 2 steps within it, like a 30-second note. If you have it set to 4, it will play 4 steps within this time. So let's try adding some of that to our sequence. Let's put it on step 3, step 7, step 11, and step 15. And let's hear it. So you can hear at this tempo gives it a little bit of a glitchy sound. So let's try adding a couple more here. And maybe let's add another one about here. So that's already pretty interesting, but we can make it even more interesting by modulating the ratchet count per step using velocity. So the number of repeats per step will be modulated by the velocity amount. So to do that, let's go back to our editor view. So mod 1 is already using velocity as a source. And we can set this last programmable destination to ratchet count. So let's turn the mod knob all the way up for it. And for program destination, we go all the way down. Sorry, I got cut off on my screen, but you can set it to ratchet count. So now mod 1 has velocity as its source and is modulating both the filter cutoff frequency and the ratchet count. And you'll have to play around with it to find the right scaling, but the different velocity amounts will give you different ratchet count amounts. Let's try slowing down the tempo a little bit more so you can really hear it. So yeah, it's pretty cool. You can get some very interesting sounds doing this. So that's basically the design of my patch. One last little thing I did, which is a pretty neat little trick here, is I turned up the keyboard tracking on the amp envelope. So I just turned this a little bit up, and what this will do is it will scale the amp envelope so that at higher notes, which in our case are hi-hat notes, the amp envelope will be shorter. And for the lower kick drum and snare drum notes, the amp envelope will still be longer. So let's hear what that sounds like. And let's turn it up more. So you can get some very cool, snappy, glitchy sounds using this. You can also, for the pitch bend wheel, set it to go up 2 octaves and down 2 octaves, which will control oscillator 1 and give you a little bit more variety while you're playing. And there you have it. That's pretty much all the logic that went behind making my drum sequence patch. Hopefully this helps demonstrate some of the power and flexibility behind the Moog Sub 37. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you for your time and have a great day.